Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Flower Power Live. It is the merry month of May, which brings us to this fertile time of year. And today's plant is one of the most recognized symbols of this sort of coming of spring, the season of fertility and love, and that is the hawthorn tree. So I'm Allison from the Well Cultivated Life. Thank you for joining me here for another plant journey on Flower Power Live. Now, the spring flowers always seem to have poems written about them, so of course I want to share one with you about the hawthorn tree, and it's by William Brown. Mark the fair blooming of the hawthorn tree, who, finely clothed in a robe of white, fills the wanton eye with May's delight. Now, the sprays of spring blooming hawthorn are a sight to see indeed. And while it's not that common around where I live, throughout Europe, especially in England, it's quite well known for its beauty, spring beauty. And now its relationship to uh, love and fertility and all these things is in part because it has an affinity for the heart in those ways, as well as sort of medicinally, which I'll tell you about a little bit later in the show. Now, there's a lot of lore that's surrounding hawthorn, and its flowers and branches have long been used for like Beltane and May Day types of celebrations. One of its common nicknames is actually just May, the May tree or May on its own. And it was commonly used for wedding ceremonies, and even the wood of the hawthorn was used to make torches to light the newlyweds' way to their wedding chambers on the night of their wedding. Now, in flower language, hawthorn, in the Victorian flower language where people used to put different flowers into bouquets to send messages, it symbolizes hope for the growing season and possibly the mating season as well. It has a number of superstitions associated with it, though, and it's thought to be bad luck to cut or bring it into your house. Oops, because it's associated with the magical fairy world. And so you don't want to piss off the fairies by cutting down one of their favorite trees. And there were a bunch of things I read about how people who had not just cut a branch so much, but had, chopped down or dug out a hawthorn tree had come to a not so pleasant experience afterwards. So I always give appropriate thanks to the plants when I harvest. And so I hope the fairies will be forgiving of me for cutting some of their hawthorn today. So the hawthorns are in the rose family, Rosaceae, which means they're related to all these other flowering trees like crab apples and pears and peaches and all of the different uh, fruits like that, as well as roses and tons of other types of plants. And the most common, the English hawthorn, is Crataegus lavigata. And then the common hawthorn, which is found around North America, is called Crataegus monogyna. So it's also known as quickthorn. I told you it was May, thorn apple, May tree, or hawberry. And the genus has lots of different species in it, and most of them are either small trees or shrubs. Now, some of these have been developed for more horticultural use and planting, and you could plant one in your yard if you wanted to. And the wild trees all generally have these white blooms with maybe a little bit of pink on them. But there are some of the horticultural varieties that have been um, are much more pink, or they've got double flowers and things like that. Now, not only is this a beautiful spring bloomer, it is also has these lovely um, not hips, haws they're called, that berries that come on in the fall. So this is some examples of some hawthorn. There's a big spray of hawthorn on this one here to the right. And this is the tree close to me. And I put this in here because I wanted to show you how all these have a distinguishing feature, which is these 5 petals. And that is the rose family, always has a 5 petals around in a circle with kind of like an open center, so the stamens are all kind of sprawling out. And this is a picture of it growing on the roadside just at the very edge of my property, and it's just kind of hiding in there with some oak and some pine trees as well. And one of the things about hawthorn is that the leaves can be very dissimilar between different types of trees. And it also has these sharp thorns on there, and you have to be really careful, hawthorn, okay? You have to be careful about stabbing yourself because it is hard for that to heal sometimes. Some people have a reaction to it. So if you do find hawthorn and you decide to do some harvesting, make sure you're very careful about it. So these differing kinds of leaves can make it very hard to identify the different types of hawthorn trees. And that doesn't surprise me, given that they're fairy trees. Fairies like to play little jokes on us, mere mortals, right? But this is why it's really important to have more than one way to distinguish what kind of plant you're actually harvesting. So, for example, in these two pictures, they look pretty much the same as far as the flowers go. They've got the characteristic rose flowers, but the one on the left is hawthorn, and the one on the right is this black chokeberry. And the only way you could tell the difference at this point is you'd have to look for the thorns, and you could also look for the leaves. And you can see in the right one, the leaves are rounded and slightly serrate on the edge, whereas on the left one, the hawthorn, they're very deeply lobed. And here's another example of how different these different hawthorn leaves can be. They've always got some kind of lobing on them, or maybe they don't. The one on the right is much more just deeply serrated. So it's, again, very important to know the different, more than one thing to be able to identify a tree. Let's see. There's a big blooming tree there. And then these are the berries, which look a lot like, almost like rose hips. They're pretty small, about the size of cranberries, and they are used for lots of different lovely things, which I will tell you about coming up next. So, the flowers and leaves can be dried and used for medicine, but it is the berries primarily that are harvested, and they can be for both food and medicine. And what better type of plant than one that is both food and medicine? Now, the berries can be made into like a syrup or a jelly or a cordial, and they can be dried and put into a tea. And in a recent workshop I did, I put some hawthorn berries into some infused honey. So you don't want to eat them raw generally because they can cause a stomach irritation for some people. So at least drying them or making them into some kind of extract is the best way to do it. Now, as I said at the beginning, hawthorn has an affinity primarily for the heart, and it mainly what it does is it helps to kind of like normalize both the health of the capillaries and the arteries, as well as the flow, which helps with the flow of blood. And then it also helps to sort of balance the types of cholesterol, because the LDL, which is this bad cholesterol, one theory is that part of the reason why that builds up in our arteries is because it's made from triglycerides, and that the heart itself prefers this as a sugar source over plain old glucose. And so the blood is supplying the heart with triglycerides, the LDL, and on that sort of intake side of the heart is where this can build up. And so what hawthorn does is it kind of prevents the deposition of excess LDL in along the linings of these coronary arteries, because sometimes this doesn't really show up as high blood pressure, although that can be an indication that something like that is happening. And then it can just be used in general as a cardiac tonic for the heart. It's something, a tonic means that you would take it regularly, pretty much every day, and it helps to just improve the nutrition, the energy reserves, and the energy release of the heart muscle by just creating a better circulation overall. And one of the ways it's thought this might happen is that it just helps to relax the nervous system and just kind of take some of the tension off of the arteries and the capillaries. And this can also be seen by sort of like a nervousness and restlessness that people with heart conditions tend to have. So it has been used successfully by some herbalists for it for that purpose. Now, one way you can tell that you might need hawthorn, according to Matthew Wood in his awesome book, where'd it go? Somewhere around here. The Earthwise Herbal. There we go. The Earthwise Herbal is that you take your hand, look at your hand, and see if it looks kind of red. Mine does. You come down here, you press on this part of your palm where it's red, and you release it. And if it stays white for an extended period of time, like the blood isn't flowing immediately back in, you may need hawthorn to help you with some of this capillary flow. Did you see that mine's white? It's a good thing I've got some hawthorn around. So I think I'll be making some hawthorn tea tonight. Looks like my capillaries need a little normalizing, and my hands are very cold right now, so it's not surprising. Now, it can also help with kind of irritated tissue states and autoimmune disorders, and especially on the skin, where it can help to kind of calm that down and get rid of some of the excess heat and help with scab formation when sometimes that have a hard time with their blood properly forming a scab. So again, working with the blood. But in traditional Chinese medicine, it's used in sluggish digestion, and especially for digesting meat. And in Europe, the hawthorn berries were collected, and again, they were used more as a food before they were really used that much as a medicine. And they were often used with meat, with cooking meat. And one thought is that the hawthorn helps to kind of make sure that there's enough fats in the lining of the intestine so that the fats of the meat can actually pass through. They can be absorbed through the cell walls and into the bloodstream, and just making it easier to assimilate fats into your system. So I think that hawthorn is pretty amazing. I don't know about you. And when I first learned about hawthorn, I was told that one of the things that it was commonly used, especially in maybe England, where this is a much more popular plant than it is here, as a cordial and given to that it had an affinity for elders, and that it was drunk nightly in these sort of retirement homes. And that's a great way to keep everyone's heart working properly. Now, the flower essence, as you might imagine, is all about helping us find a better state of love within our hearts and for others. And it's also for those who wish to heal their hearts from trauma or other sorts of difficult experiences that you might have had, because it both nurtures and protects our more spiritual, emotional aspects of our heart. Now, according to Soulflower Plant Spirit Essences, hawthorn is a medicine for the heart on all levels. It supports a strong and protected, open-hearted state, allowing you to fully give and receive love so that you can truly come into your own divine strength and power. And One Willow says that it's a protector of the brokenhearted and can help transform long-held trauma as well as acute heartache. It encircles the heart with comfort and protection. And Grandparents of the Forest says that it works with your spiritual heart to help you remember that you are actually embodied love. It's the guide and the guardian of the sacred loving space. And they recommend it for children as a great essence to help children open their heart, but still feel somewhat protected at the same time. Now, our oracle card is from the Herbcrafter's Tarot. And it is from the major arcana. It's the Lovers. And it shows a picture here of two different sort of crowns of hawthorn. One is the hawthorn in flower, and the other is the Hawthorn in berry, and the card is the lovers, and it has them crossing each other, and there's a name for it. I can't remember what this geometric pattern is, but it's the two circles crossing each other and creating the space between the two that is the result of the union of the two coming together. So the two holes coming together and creating this kind of space here. And so the words are dance with the beloved, desire in spring becomes sustenance in fall, love blooms, love wounds, love heals. And so one of the things from the card is that they're talking about how relationships that are based on like a mutual desire are going to lead us to very sweet rewards, but you take only what's yours and what you love, and just to be careful not to pick too many flowers in the spring. You won't be getting berries in the fall, right? And I love how they point out that the thorns, while menacing, can also be protective. So this is where we get this idea of hawthorn being both opening and protecting at the same time. So now the three aspects of the hawthorn tree are representative of our relationships. Again, the beauty and the love for another person, the struggles, the thorns and the difficulties that we often have. And then finally, when we get through that, we have the fruit that is born out of the relationship between the two people. And this can be, your lover, or it can just be a friend or any other kind of relationship. And particularly, how about the relationship with yourself? We definitely have plenty of struggles and thorns, and that oftentimes we don't see our beauty, and then we don't end up with good fruit. So we don't want to be just solely made of thorns as a way of protecting ourselves. We want to be able to give our love and care to people without feeling vulnerable. So there is this real balance between those two aspects. So how can you find a place to between this sort of giving and caring and being in relationship with others without getting wounded and being able to keep yourself a little bit protected? It's not an easy task for most of us. We either give too much, we don't give enough, we don't really have a balance in that. But remember that when you do come to this balance, your blood is flowing, your lifeblood is flowing, and the result is this beautiful fruit that comes from the union of the working together in relationship with others. So that's our message from Hawthorne tonight. Before I go, I have to share with you this incredible plant that I found at the garden center. It is a passion flower plant, and some of you may have heard of this. It is used medicinally for it's helped for relaxation and sleep and things like that. I'd love to do a whole show on it if it will bloom at the time, but it seems to be blooming for only one day at a time. I have no idea. This will be here next time I decide to do a show on passion flower. So thank you so much for joining me. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and like so you don't miss any of my other shows. And I will see you all next week for another Flower Power Live. Take care, everybody.